The moment I learned the truth, it felt like the ground dropped out from under me. My parents sat across the table, their eyes darting away from mine, guilt dripping from their silence. I clutched the acceptance letter from my dream university, the one I had worked for since freshman year, the one that promised a future I could almost taste. But the words coming from my mother's mouth didn't match the hope burning in my chest. Honey, the fund isn't available anymore. Not available. Like it was some package lost in the mail. My father cleared his throat, trying to soften the blow, but his explanation only made the blood roar in my ears. We thought Claire needed it more right now, for her wedding. You'll find another way, sweetheart. Another way, as if scholarships grew on trees, as if loans wouldn't chain me down for decades, as if the years of honor rolls, sleepless nights, and AP exams were all just negotiable. Claire, my older sister, didn't even look ashamed. She sat there, practically glowing, her engagement ring catching the light, her smile smug as though she had won some competition I didn't even know I was in. Don't worry, sis, she said, with that syrupy tone that dripped condescension. College will always be there, but a wedding, that's once in a lifetime. The rage that burned through me in that moment was unlike anything I'd felt before. All those nights I stayed up studying while she went out partying. All those weekends I spent volunteering, trying to build the perfect resume, while she coasted by with charm and excuses. And now, my hard work was being siphoned away to pay for her flowers, her cake, her dream dress. My future was being traded for her fantasy. But what stunned me most wasn't Claire's smugness, it was my parents' complicity. They didn't just allow it, they enabled it. They made a choice. And it wasn't me. For years, I had been the dependable one, the one who didn't ask for much, the one who worked quietly in the background. Claire was always the star, and I was expected to orbit around her glow. But this was the moment they crossed the line. I didn't cry, not then. I smiled tightly, folded my acceptance letter back into its envelope, and excused myself from the table. My hands were trembling, but my mind was clear. They thought I would roll over, that I would swallow the injustice like I always had. They thought I would fade into the background, let Claire have her moment. But they were wrong, because if Claire had stolen my future for her wedding, then I would take her wedding and make sure. It became the nightmare she never saw coming. The plan didn't arrive fully formed. At first, it was nothing more than a bitter thought, a whispered what if that I tried to push away. Maybe I could just move on. Maybe I could find a way to let it go. But every time I saw Claire flipping through glossy wedding magazines, every time she pranced around the house with Mom, squealing about dresses and venues, that whisper grew louder. It became a roar I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just about the money anymore, it was about the principle. She had stolen something from me, and my parents had let her. She was being rewarded for selfishness, while I was punished for responsibility. And if I didn't push back, if I didn't make them see what they had done, then I'd be erasing myself from my own story. So I started watching, listening, gathering. Claire, blinded by her own vanity, made it easy. She was always talking about the ballroom she'd reserved downtown, the 5-tier cake she just had to have. The florist she said was the best in the state. She treated every conversation like a stage and assumed everyone was her audience. I made myself invisible, nodding at the right moments, asking innocent-sounding questions, letting her feed me every detail. Each night, I'd retreat to my room and write it all down. Vendor names, dates, contract terms. I built a map of her entire wedding, piece by fragile piece. And the more I wrote, the stronger I felt. For once, I wasn't powerless. I had something. She didn't. Awareness. Control. She thought she was invincible, but she didn't realize how many cracks there were in her foundation. The first test came sooner than I expected. Claire asked me to proofread her emails to vendors something she was too busy to do herself. I smiled sweetly, took her laptop, and scrolled through her inbox. There it was, contracts, confirmations, delicate schedules balancing on the assumption that everything would run perfectly. My pulse quickened. With a few keystrokes, I could flip her world upside down, but I held back. Not yet. Timing was everything. If I moved too early, she'd just patch things up. I needed her to feel secure, certain that nothing could go wrong. That way, when the collapse came, it would hit her like an avalanche. At dinner that night, she bragged about her florist. They said they've never done arrangements this elaborate before. She gushed. Mom practically swooning beside her. Dad raised his glass to toast her vision. I sat there quietly, chewing my food, imagining her face when she discovered the truth that the florist was gone. The deposit wasted. Her dream bouquets vanished into thin air. I wasn't just plotting revenge. I was teaching a lesson. To Claire, to my parents, to all of them. They had underestimated me for too long. They thought I was the quiet one, the dependable one, the one who would never fight back. But soon, they'd see. The florist was my first real move. Claire had been bragging about their exclusivity for weeks, parading their name around like it was a badge of honor. She left their business card tucked into her binder, a careless mistake that became my weapon. Late one night, when the house was quiet, I dialed the number. "Hi, I'm calling on behalf of Claire Richardson," I said, sweet as honey. I explained that due to a sudden change in plans, she needed to cancel her order. The woman on the other end hesitated, reminding me that the deposit was non-refundable. I pretended to sigh with relief, telling her that was exactly what Claire expected, and thanked her for making the process so smooth. I hung up, my hands trembling, a rush of adrenaline coursing through me. It was done. Just like that. The flowers were gone. Claire wouldn't realize until it was far too late. The next morning, she was glowing, sipping coffee and gushing about centerpiece colors while I sat across from her, biting back a smile. She thought everything was perfect, that the world was bending to her will. But beneath the surface, the cracks were already spreading. It wasn't enough to sabotage her vendors. I wanted her to feel what I had felt, invisible, powerless, betrayed by the very people she trusted most. So I made sure to play the supportive sister by day, nodding at her ideas, offering to run errands, even helping her organize her binder. Each gesture made her trust me more, made her blind to what I was really doing. The band was trickier. They had contracts, signatures, confirmation codes. But I had her email. Claire often left her laptop unlocked, too busy posting engagement photos to bother with security. One night, while she showered, I slipped into her account and typed a simple message to the band. "We need to reschedule to August 14th instead of July 14th. Thank you so much for being flexible." It was a small change, a single digit, but it was enough. They confirmed the switch without hesitation, and I deleted the emails before logging out. By the time Claire realized, they would be booked for another event on her actual wedding day. Every move tightened the noose, and yet, no one suspected me. To my parents, I was the dutiful daughter, staying quiet while Claire shone. To Claire, I was the little sister eager to help. To myself, I was finally something more. I was in control. Still, there was one angle I hadn't touched yet. Ethan, my sister's fiance. He was the only person in this entire circus who had shown me kindness. Once, while Claire was too busy criticizing the photographer's portfolio, he asked me how I was handling the news about college. I remember the sincerity in his eyes, the way he actually listened. That's when another thought began to take shape, darker and more dangerous than anything I'd considered before. Vendors could be replaced, venues could be switched. But what if the groom started questioning the bride herself? Ethan wasn't like Claire, where she was brash and entitled. He was grounded, thoughtful. Sometimes I wondered how he'd fallen for her in the first place. But then I'd watch her turn on the charm in public. The way she could twist any situation to make herself look dazzling, and it made sense. He saw the polished version of Claire, not the selfish one I grew up with. That contrast gave me an opening. If I could plant doubts, subtle ones, he might start to see past the facade, and once a crack formed in trust, it would only spread. I started with small things, over casual conversations. I'd let comments slip, never enough to sound deliberate. "Claire's been so stressed," I'd say softly. "Sometimes she takes it out on people without meaning to." Or, "I know she's excited, but she hasn't really been sleeping much. She gets intense when she's tired." Ethan would frown, thoughtful, but never argue. One evening, while Claire was on the phone arguing with a caterer about portion sizes, Ethan found me in the kitchen. "Does she always get like this?" he asked, almost embarrassed. I shrugged, choosing my words carefully. "She wants everything perfect. She's always been that way." I let the silence linger, as though there was more I wasn't saying. He didn't press, but I could see it in his eyes. He was filing it away. Meanwhile, Claire's perfect day was slowly unraveling, though she didn't know it yet. The florist was gone, the band rescheduled, and she was still parading around the house like a queen. The irony nearly made me laugh. She was planning every detail of a wedding that was already collapsing in the shadows. But I wasn't reckless. I knew if I pushed too hard, Ethan might catch on to what I was doing. So I kept my tone natural, my gesture small. Every seed I planted had to feel organic, accidental. The real challenge was my parents. They were so wrapped up in Claire's excitement that they didn't notice me fading into the background. Or maybe they noticed and didn't care. Mom spent her days accompanying Claire to dress fittings, cake tastings, spa appointments. Dad signed checks with a grimace but never once questioned the fairness of it all. I stayed quiet, smiling when expected, nodding along, all while building the storm that would break them. One night, I sat in my room staring at my acceptance letter again. The seal at the top gleamed under the lamplight, a cruel reminder of the future I was being denied. My chest tightened, but instead of tears, I felt something colder, determination. Claire had stolen my chance, but I had the power to decide how high she would fall, and I wanted it to hurt. Not just for her, but for everyone who had looked me in the eye and told me my dreams were less important. The unraveling began quietly. Claire didn't notice at first. Why would she? She was too busy rehearsing her bridal smile in the mirror and bombarding Ethan with decisions about linen colors and seating charts. But when the first email arrived from the florist confirming cancellation, her shriek echoed through the entire house. I was in the kitchen, sipping water, when she stormed in, clutching her phone. "They canceled," she shouted, eyes wide with disbelief. "They said I told them to." Mom dropped her spoon into the pot she was stirring. "That has to be a mistake, darling." But Claire was already pacing, stabbing at her screen. "I never canceled anything. They're refusing to refund the deposit." She looked at me, suspicion flickering across her face. But then it softened. Of course she didn't suspect me. Why would she? I was the invisible sister, the one who never made waves. I tilted my head, pretending concern. "Maybe they double booked and don't want to admit it?" She groaned, collapsing into a chair. "This is a disaster. Do you know how impossible it is to find a florist this close to the date?" I bit back a smile. Impossible was exactly what I was aiming for. But Claire didn't wallow for long. She never did. She launched into damage control mode, calling vendor after vendor, demanding availability. Mom hovered beside her, murmuring encouragement, while Dad grumbled about money from the couch. I watched the chaos unfold with quiet satisfaction. A week later came the second blow, the band. Claire discovered the scheduling mix-up when she called to confirm rehearsal times. I'll never forget the look on her face when the manager told her they were booked for August, not July. Her voice rose an octave. "That's not possible. I signed the contract for July." I sat across the room, pretending to scroll on my phone, my pulse racing with the effort not to laugh. "You must have requested the change," the manager insisted. Claire's cheeks turned crimson. Why would I ever change it to August? Ethan, sitting beside her, rubbed his temples. Maybe there was a mistake in communication? Her eyes darted to me again, but once more, she dismissed the thought. I was too quiet, too harmless. She couldn't imagine me pulling strings behind the scenes. By now, cracks were forming in her composure. She snapped at Mom for suggesting a DJ, snapped at Dad for hesitating about more money, snapped at Ethan for not taking her side fiercely enough. And through it all, I kept my mask in place, helpful and sympathetic, while savoring every second of her unraveling. Because this wasn't just revenge anymore. This was balance. For once, Claire was the one scrambling, and I was the one watching from above. The morning everything truly collapsed began like any other. Claire was on a call, pacing the hallway in her satin robe, barking orders to whoever was unlucky enough to be on the other end. I sat on the couch, pretending to scroll through messages, though my mind was already 10 steps ahead. The venue had always been her crown jewel, the place she bragged about to anyone who would listen, an exclusive estate, she'd say, her eyes gleaming. People wait years to book it, but I got it. She even practiced how she'd walk down its sweeping staircase. For her, the venue wasn't just a location, it was her stage. So when the call came in from the coordinator saying the booking was void, it was as if someone had ripped the ground out from beneath her. Her voice cracked, sharp and panicked. "Void? No, no. That can't be right. We're 3 weeks out. This is some kind of mistake." The coordinator was firm but apologetic. "We have a record of cancellation, signed digitally from your account." Claire's face drained of color. She sank onto the chair, phone still pressed to her ear, as if the weight of the news had physically knocked her down. Ethan rushed over. "What do you mean canceled, Claire? You didn't." "I didn't," she wailed. "Why would I cancel the venue? This is the most important part of the wedding." Mom looked like she'd been slapped. Dad muttered something about contracts and money again, but no one was listening. I stayed quiet, biting the inside of my cheek to stop the smirk from spreading. This was the crescendo, the moment I had orchestrated so carefully. And here was the delicious irony. Claire had stolen my chance at education, my future stability. Now I had stolen hers, her dream wedding, the one she had curated piece by piece like a museum exhibit. The next days blurred into chaos. Every call Claire made ended in rejection. Every attempt to salvage her vision was met with a slammed door. Backup venues were full, bands unavailable, florists already booked solid. The closer the date loomed, the more frantic she became. Ethan, once patient, began snapping. "It's not the end of the world, Claire. We can still get married, even if it's not in some mansion." That was the breaking point. She turned on him with venom I hadn't even expected. "Do you even care about this wedding? About me? Do you understand how humiliated I'll be if it's not perfect?" Silence followed, thick and suffocating. I sat in the corner, invisible but very much present, storing every moment in my memory like treasures. Because revenge, I learn it, isn't about the big explosion. It's about the slow, careful dismantling of everything someone thought untouchable. It's about watching them trip over their own pride while you simply stand aside. The atmosphere in our house shifted completely after that. What had once been endless chatter about flower arrangements, champagne toasts, and bridal fittings became constant screaming matches. Claire lashed out at everyone: Mom for not calling her friends to pull strings, Dad for refusing to hand over more savings, Ethan for daring to suggest they postpone. She even snapped at me, though half-heartedly, still believing I was her silent ally. "Why are you just sitting there? Do you not realize how bad this is? You should be helping me search for alternatives." I nodded obediently, even pulled up a few half-baked suggestions on my phone. But each time I made a call, I made sure the trail ended in another dead end. Behind my sympathetic nods, I was savoring the unraveling of her perfect facade. Her friends weren't as forgiving. When word spread that the grand estate was gone, that the band had canceled, that the florist had backed out, whispers began to ripple through her social circle. One by one, her bridesmaids stopped gushing about the big day. One even dropped out, claiming she couldn't rearrange her schedule for a new date. I caught Claire crying in the bathroom one night, her makeup smeared across her cheeks, her phone buzzing with unanswered messages. "They're all abandoning me," she whispered to her reflection. For a moment, something inside me wavered. She was still my sister. I thought of the nights we used to stay up whispering as kids, the secrets we shared before life turned us into enemies. But then I remembered the box with my name on it, emptied out to fund her fantasy. The college rejection letter that had arrived because tuition wasn't paid. The way she had smiled through it all, unapologetic, convinced her dreams were more important than mine. That memory hardened me again. Ethan, though, was reaching his breaking point. He loved Claire, but he wasn't blind. I overheard him one evening, his voice low but fierce. "This obsession with appearances, it's not worth losing everything else. If the people around you only care about how glamorous the wedding looks, then they don't care about us." Claire's response was venomous. "Don't you dare minimize this. You don't understand, this was supposed to be the day everyone would finally see me the way I deserve to be seen." Her words hung heavy in the air, revealing more than she realized. This wedding had never been about love. Not really. It was about image, validation, proving something to the world. And that, I realized, was why my revenge cut so deeply, because I hadn't just sabotaged a party. I had shattered the mirror she had built her identity around. The weeks dragged on, each one pulling the illusion of Claire's perfect life further apart. Without her grand wedding to anchor her, she spiraled. Our parents tried to soothe her, suggesting smaller venues, backyard receptions, even City Hall. But every compromise felt like humiliation to her. She refused to settle for less, and in her refusal, she alienated everyone who was trying to help. I watched it all with quiet detachment. There were moments I almost slipped. Moments when I wanted to yell at her, to reveal that I was behind her unraveling. But restraint was more powerful. Letting her believe the universe had turned against her was far sweeter than her knowing. It was my hand pulling the strings. Ethan grew colder by the day. I noticed how often he stayed late at work, how his laughter faded when he came home. Their engagement, once plastered all over social media, fell into silence. Friends who once flooded her posts with heart emojis now rarely liked or commented. Claire's perfect audience was slipping away, leaving her with only her frustration and me, the sister she still believed was silently rooting for her. One night, while she paced the kitchen ranting about another lost deposit, she said something that made my chest tighten with both satisfaction and pity. This was supposed to be my one chance to shine. You don't get it. You've always been invisible. No one expects anything from you. But me. I have to be perfect. Invisible. The word sliced through me. It wasn't just my college fund she had stolen. It was the acknowledgement, the right to be seen, the dignity of being treated as someone whose life mattered. For years, she had cast me in her shadow, and when she'd taken that money, she had proven once and for all how little she valued my future. And yet, hearing her admit her desperation, her fear of being anything less than adored, gave me an understanding I hadn't expected. Claire wasn't invincible. She was terrified. Terrified of being ordinary, terrified of being overlooked, terrified of being me. Still, empathy didn't erase justice. I let her words sink into me. Not to forgive her, but to remind myself why I couldn't back down. If I relented now, she'd keep doing it, taking, assuming, erasing. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. It was about breaking a cycle that had defined our entire lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. For once, I had the power, and she was the one scrambling, making excuses, begging for scraps of approval. For once, I wasn't invisible, I was the ghost in her story, the unseen hand reshaping her fate. And the best part? She still had no idea. The night of what should have been Claire's wedding came, like a ghost haunting her dreams. The date had been circled on calendars, saved in phones, and whispered about for nearly 2 years. Instead of walking down an aisle lined with flowers, she sat curled on the couch in our parents' living room, her dress still hanging untouched in her closet upstairs. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the television with the sound off, the flickering light reflecting in her glassy eyes. Mom hovered nearby, wringing her hands, trying to offer comfort without knowing what to say. Dad poured himself a drink and avoided eye contact altogether. Ethan was nowhere to be found. I stood in the doorway, watching her crumble in silence. My chest tightened not with guilt, but with the weight of the moment. This was the culmination of years of imbalance, the raw consequence of her choices and my quiet retribution. For once, she wasn't the center of a glittering spotlight. She was a woman facing the ruins of her own entitlement. "Do you think people are laughing at me?" she asked suddenly, her voice small, almost childlike. The question wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but it landed on me like a plea. I wanted to tell her the truth, that yes, people were whispering, that her friends had already moved on to new gossip, that the world didn't revolve around her heartbreak. But instead, I said nothing. Sometimes silence is more cutting than words. The following weeks were a blur of whispered phone calls and hushed arguments. Ethan finally broke off the engagement, citing stress, bad timing, and incompatibility. But everyone knew the truth. He didn't want to marry into the chaos. Claire tried to salvage her pride, spinning stories about how she decided to call it off, how she wanted to focus on herself. But even her closest friends stopped believing her. Meanwhile, I thrived quietly. I picked up extra shifts, applied for scholarships, and began piecing together the education she had tried to steal from me. Each acceptance letter, each small victory, felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, built by my own hands, not handed to me at someone else's expense. There were moments, though, when the weight of it pressed down. Watching her sit alone, shoulders slumped, her laughter gone, it tugged at a thread of compassion buried deep inside me. We were still sisters, bound by blood and memory. I remembered the little girl who used to braid my hair, who used to sneak me cookies after bedtime, who used to promise we'd always have each other. But then I remembered the iPad messages, the casual dismissal of my worth, the ease with which she'd stolen what I had worked for. Compassion had its place, but not at the expense of accountability. As the leaves began to change and fall settled in, I realized something. I hadn't just taken away her dream wedding. I had forced her to see a version of herself she had spent her life running from. And maybe, just maybe, that was the only way she would ever change. Months passed, and the silence between Claire and me grew into something almost tangible. We weren't fighting, but we weren't sisters anymore either. Every family gathering became a theater of avoidance. She'd sit on one side of the table, scrolling through her phone, while I sat on the other, focusing on my plate. Our parents tried to smooth things over, dropping hints that we should talk it out, but neither of us budged. One evening, after dinner at my parents' house, Claire cornered me in the kitchen. The clatter of dishes in the sink was the only sound until she finally spoke. Did you have anything to do with it?" Her eyes were sharp, but there was a tremor in her voice, a flicker of doubt she couldn't suppress. I kept my face neutral, my hands steady as I dried a plate. "With what?" I asked, my tone calm, almost casual. "The deposits, the calls, everything falling apart," she pressed, her words spilling out faster now. It was too much, too sudden. Someone had to be behind it. For a moment, I thought about telling her the truth, about laying it all bare, the stolen fund, the years of invisibility, the betrayal that had pushed me into action. But instead, I gave her the smallest shrug. "Not everything is about you, Claire. Sometimes life just unravels." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but no words came. She studied me for a long time, searching for cracks in my composure. When she found none, she finally turned away, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her suspicions was too heavy to carry. That night, I lay awake thinking about her question. She had been right to wonder, right to suspect. But part of me realized that even if she knew the truth, it wouldn't matter. She would still see herself as the victim, still paint me as jealous or bitter. She wasn't ready to confront the reality of what she'd done, and maybe she never would be. In the meantime, I focused on my own path. College wasn't easy. Juggling work and classes left me exhausted most days, but every lecture, every exam, every late night in the library was proof that I was building something real. My future wasn't shiny and effortless like hers had seemed, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if I'd gone too far, watching her isolate herself, watching her sparkle dim. There were moments when revenge tasted bittersweet. But then I remembered sitting in my room, holding the letter that confirmed my college dreams had been stolen, while she twirled in a gown she hadn't even paid for. Justice doesn't always come clean. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it leaves scars, but it still matters. And in the quiet of those long nights, I knew my story wasn't about destroying her. It was about finally stepping out of her shadow. By spring, the family had stopped mentioning Claire's almost wedding altogether. It was as if burying the memory could erase the sting of it. But the silence only made the cracks more visible. She drifted further from Ethan, from her friends, even from Mom and Dad, who had once held her up like a prized trophy. One afternoon, I ran into her at the grocery store. She wasn't dressed in her usual polished way, no manicured nails, no designer purse, just sweatpants, messy hair, and tired eyes. For the first time, she looked ordinary. She glanced at me, hesitated, then pushed her cart down the next aisle without a word. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, what I felt was harder to define, a mix of relief, sorrow, and a strange kind of mourning for the sister I had once admired, even when she overshadowed me. Later that night, I thought about our childhood, about the summers when we built sandcastles until the tide washed them away, the winters when we huddled under blankets watching movies. Back then, there had been no competition, no jealousy, just two sisters who believed the world was big enough for both of them. Somewhere along the way, that bond had been traded for applause, status, and the illusion of perfection. I wondered if revenge had given me back what I wanted. It had certainly balanced the scales. But did it heal the wounds? Or did it simply carve new ones in both of us? At school, I kept pushing forward. Professors noticed my work ethic. Classmates invited me into study groups. And for once in my life, I felt like I was seen for my own merits. No one compared me to Claire. No one dismissed me as invisible. That validation became my anger. One weekend, while visiting home, I overheard Mom on the phone. She was talking to a friend, her voice hushed but urgent. Claire just hasn't been herself. She won't leave the house some days. It's like she doesn't know who she is without all the attention." The words echoed in my head long after she hung up. For Claire, the wedding wasn't just about love or celebration. It was her stage, her validation, her proof that she was still shining. And when I pulled the rug out from under her, she hadn't just lost an event, she'd lost her identity. That realization brought me no joy, but it did bring me clarity. Revenge isn't clean. It doesn't come with a tidy bow of satisfaction. It lingers. It complicates. It forces you to confront not just the pain you caused, but the pain that pushed you there in the first place. Yet even with that knowledge, I didn't regret it. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't just Claire's sister. I was me. And I was finally learning to take up space in my own life. Summer arrived with its thick, humid air and the sense that life was shifting in subtle but irreversible ways. Claire still lived at home, drifting through her days with the kind of lethargy that once would have been unthinkable for her. She used to thrive on movement, on events, on being seen. Now she avoided crowds, kept her social media private, and rarely looked anyone in the eye. One evening, she knocked softly on my bedroom door. I was home from college for the weekend, buried in a paper due Monday. When I opened the door, she stood there barefoot, wearing an oversized sweater, her hair hanging loose. For the first time in years, she looked like the sister I'd grown up with. Not the polished woman who demanded attention, but the girl who used to curl up beside me with whispered secrets. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. Her voice was small, tentative. I nodded, setting aside my laptop. She sat on the edge of my bed, picking at a loose thread in her sweater. The silence stretched until I thought she might leave without saying anything. Then, in a whisper, she said, "I don't know who I am anymore." The admission hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to remind her of everything she had stolen, of the nights I cried over the future she had taken from me. But instead, I listened, because in that moment, she wasn't the villain in my story. She was a broken person, trying to piece herself back together. She confessed how ashamed she felt, how the wedding disaster had shattered her confidence, how she'd pushed people away because she couldn't bear their pity. "I thought being perfect would keep people close," she said, her eyes wet, "but it just made me lonely." I didn't forgive her. Not then. Not completely. But I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I reached out and held her hand. For the first time in years, she didn't pull away. We sat like that for a long time, two sisters in the quiet of a summer night, bound not by perfection or revenge, but by something more fragile: honesty. The next day, she asked if I wanted to grab coffee. It wasn't much, just a simple outing, but it felt like the first brick laid in rebuilding something we'd both lost. We didn't talk about the money, the wedding, or the years of resentment. Instead, we talked about little things: movies, books, the new bakery in town. It was almost normal, almost easy. I didn't know what our future as sisters would look like. Maybe we'd never be as close as we once were. But for the first time, I realized revenge had given me more than justice. It had given me the space to step into myself, and the choice to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with her on my terms. The weeks that followed were strange, like learning to walk on unsteady legs. Claire and I weren't enemies anymore, but we weren't sisters in the way we used to be either. Every conversation felt cautious, like stepping on fragile glass, afraid one wrong word would shatter the tentative peace we'd begun to build. She tried, though. She really did. She started cooking dinner once a week, experimenting with recipes she found online. Sometimes the meals were barely edible, but I ate them anyway, grateful for the gesture. She asked me about school, genuinely curious in a way she never had been before. And when she stumbled, when her voice cracked under the weight of old habits and self-pity, she caught herself and started again. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the fireflies, she turned to me and asked, "Do you ever wish things had gone differently? With the wedding? With everything?" The question lingered in the humid air. I thought about it for a long time before answering. Part of me wanted to say yes, that I wished she hadn't stolen from me, that I wished I hadn't been pushed to sabotage her, that I wished we could have skipped all the hurt. But another part of me knew the truth. Without the collapse, without the unraveling, neither of us would be sitting here now, trying to rebuild something real. "I think things happened the way they needed to," I said finally. My voice was steady, but inside I felt the weight of the truth settle like a stone in my chest. She nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the flicker of lightning bugs. I don't know who I'd be if it hadn't all fallen apart. The honesty of her words caught me off guard. For once, she wasn't trying to spin a story or craft an image. She was admitting the raw, unpolished truth. She was lost. And somehow, that vulnerability made her feel more human, more like the sister I had once loved without hesitation. Over the next few weeks, she started making small changes. She volunteered at the local shelter, picked up part-time work, even reconnected with friends she had pushed away. Each step was tiny, but it was hers, and I couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. Maybe she wasn't the untouchable star anymore, but she was finally learning how to live without the spotlight. As for me, I kept moving forward with school, balancing work and study, shaping a future that was mine alone. And for the first time, I didn't feel overshadowed. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like me, whole, steady, and seen. Revenge had started this story, but what remained was something deeper. The slow, painful, imperfect journey of two sisters trying to find their way back to each other. Autumn rolled in with crisp winds and golden leaves, and with it came a quiet rhythm between Claire and me. We weren't the same sisters we'd been as children, nor the strangers we had become after her betrayal. We were something in between, cautious, learning, sometimes stumbling, but moving forward nonetheless. One Saturday, she asked if I'd join her for a walk downtown. The farmers' market was bustling with vendors and musicians, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't seem out of place. She smiled at the flower stalls, lingered at the handmade jewelry stands, and even really laughed when a busker dropped his guitar mid-song. For a moment, I glimpsed the version of her that wasn't obsessed with perfection, the version that existed before life became a performance. As we sat on a bench sharing a paper bag of roasted chestnuts, she admitted something that surprised me. "I've been seeing a therapist," she said softly, as if the words might break if she spoke them too loud. I looked at her, startled. Claire had always dismissed therapy, calling it for people who can't handle their problems. To hear her say it now was like watching the walls of her castle finally crumble. "It's hard," she continued, staring at the ground, facing myself, admitting how much I hurt people, how much I hurt you. "It's the hardest thing I've ever done, but it feels different, like maybe I can breathe again." I didn't know what to say at first. My instinct was to guard myself, to hold on to the anger that had fueled me for so long, but I also knew how rare it was for Claire to admit fault, to expose the parts of herself she had always hidden. "That's good," I said finally, and I meant it. She nodded, then looked at me with eyes that were clearer than I had seen in years. "I know I can't fix everything. I know I can't undo what I did to you, but I want to try. I want to be better than the person I was." The sincerity in her voice caught me off guard. For the first time, I believed her. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how far we'd come. Revenge had given me justice. Yes, it had forced Claire to face consequences she had long avoided. But what lingered now wasn't the triumph of her downfall, it was the possibility of her growth. And mine. I realized that my story wasn't just about taking something from her. It was about reclaiming myself, about proving that I wasn't invisible, about demanding the respect I deserved. And in that reclamation, I had created space for something unexpected, the fragile beginnings of forgiveness. Winter arrived quietly, blanketing the world in muted grays and silvers. The cold had a way of making everything sharper, clearer, and it mirrored the clarity I felt inside myself. My life wasn't perfect. Not by any means, but it was mine. Every paper I turned in, every dollar I earned at work, every small victory was proof that I was no longer living in someone else's shadow. Claire had changed too, though not overnight. She stumbled, often slipping into old patterns of vanity or deflection, but she was different. There was a rawness to her now, a humility I had never seen before. At Christmas, she surprised everyone by helping cook dinner. She wasn't great at it, and the mashed potatoes were a little lumpy, but she laughed at herself instead of pouting. For once, the holiday wasn't about her center stage. It was about family, messy and imperfect. Later that night, after the dishes were washed and the house grew quiet, she sat across from me by the fireplace. "Do you ever hate me?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. I studied her face, the shadows under her eyes, the vulnerability that lingered where arrogance used to live. "I did," I admitted, "for a long time." "And now?" she pressed. I thought about it carefully. Hate had fueled me once, had given me the courage to fight back against years of being overlooked. But hate wasn't what I felt now. Now I just don't want to go back to how things were. I need you to see me, not as your helper, not as your shadow, just as me. Her eyes glistened as she nodded slowly. I see you, she said, and for the first time, I believed she meant it. The fire crackled between us, filling the silence with warmth. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, a bridge, fragile but real. As the year drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened. My college funds stolen, her wedding destroyed, our relationship shattered and slowly pieced back together. Revenge had set it all in motion. But what lingered wasn't bitterness, it was transformation. We had both been forced to confront truths we'd long ignored. Her dependence on being adored, my willingness to disappear into the background. And in that confrontation, something new was born. It wasn't a perfect ending, but maybe that was the point. Life isn't about perfect stories tied up in neat bows. It's about the messy, painful, beautiful work of becoming who we are meant to be. And for the first time, I knew who I was.